Ladies and gentlemen, in this lightning round, of course, Kevin Tompkins, Britt Flinn, Andrew Cooper. We are on Better Sports Network. We are on Fantasy Alarms YouTube. Gang, how we doing today? It's the end of June. We are almost in training camp season. I am very excited. How about you guys?
I can't wait. I need answers. I need to see things, people in actual pads and not just shorts. I need it in my life.
I need football, man. I think the first training camp is the Chiefs start on the 23rd of July. So it's coming up. The Scott Fish Bowl kicks off fantasy football season. Then we get that. Then we get the Hall of Fame game August 4th. Actual football, Jets at Browns. So pretty much there.
Excited. And speaking of exciting, Mr. John Daigle joined us for 4 for 4. John, my friend, how are you?
I had to test out a new streaming app that I haven't used before here. So it took me a second to get in, but we're all here and excited to join everyone.
You're looking good. You're looking crisp.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is good. This platform, I'm used to StreamYard, so I support this.
Yeah, no, it's we jumped over from StreamYard's good too, but This one professional. We got Earn Dog behind the glass producing the whole thing, so pretty high quality, quality stuff.
Absolutely. And we're going to get in to talking about some ADP landmines today. Coop, why don't you start us off here? We got the draft guide going for Fantasy Alarm, ready to get that up and running. Actually, it is up and running. It's living.
Yeah, so let's do some quick housekeeping, and then we'll make everybody mad by giving our landmines, which I'm sure my first one people aren't going to love. But what people will love, our draft guide's up right now. We say living draft guide is because we have all the rankings out early. We have a bunch of articles out early, but all summer we're going to update everything. We're going to update the rankings. We've got content dropping from now all the way through September. When you buy the draft guide, you get all of that. So go to fantasyalarm.com/NFL draft guide now. Get signed up now, get in there, and let's go.
Absolutely. And not only that, we've got the Lightning Round Best Ball Championship 3, which drafts will be starting in just a couple weeks. So get in, find my Twitter at KTompkins. I pin tweet is in there. Find that. We have got almost as many people as we had last year, hoping to shoot for the moon and get certainly over that. So definitely charity based. We raised about the last 2 years over $3,000. So hopefully trying to get that amount this year. Very excited. And let's get into some landmines. John, we obviously with pockets of the draft, there's certainly, round one, it's wide receiver heavy, but there's some running backs sprinkled in there. Really just making the picks you want to pick, but there's still landmines in there that you want to be cognizant of. Maybe not the greatest of picks in the first couple rounds. Like, who are some guys in the draft that you're not super enthused to pick? Maybe they have a lot more downside than we think.
I like this time of year because, especially in best ball drafts, you're really just taking a big picture approach to construction in drafts and whatever the rooms do. And so right now, at least as of the end of June, beginning of July, I think Christian McCaffrey's a landmine, not necessarily from the micro analysis of what he's capable of. Even in the 6 games he played with Elijah Mitchell last year, McCaffrey led all running backs, not just 49ers, but all running backs with 18.5% of San Francisco's targets. So I actually do think the citing Elijah Mitchell's usage with McCaffrey is slightly overblown. McCaffrey's still my RB1 overall. But what happens in drafts right now is that in the range you take McCaffrey with one of your top 5 picks, when it comes back to you in the 2nd and 3rd round, that's when usually the entire crop of Tony Pollard, Ramondre Stevenson, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and Breece Hall are all there in the 2nd, and sometimes even when it comes back to you, 3rd round, to take 2 running backs in those 2 sections. And so for me, I think it makes the most sense to fade Christian McCaffrey as of this time until at least 2 or 3 of those players are hyped up more. Nick Chubb used to be there, and now we're seeing Nick Chubb getting so much closer to the 1st, 2nd round turn as, in my opinion, he should have been all along. And so right now, just given all those good players there, I want to instead take a receiver or Travis Kelce with one of the top 5 picks and then get my running back and just make sure I don't pin myself in a tough corner to get out of with an RB start, for example, in those first 3 picks.
Yeah, and that's why I'm glad that when we knew we were going to do the landmines, I'm glad we got you on for the show because, and it's not just you, it's all the guys at 4for4 where you guys really excel and where I love your content. TJ Hernandez does a ton of stuff too
He's
over there
great
at
at it.
4for4. Great, where it's like it's this game theory part of it, right? In best ball, it's not just your hometown league. Like you have to construct your roster not just to beat the 12 guys you're facing a lot of times, but in these tournaments, thousands of people, right? So it's not just about picking the best guys when they're available. You're trying to build these ideal roster constructions, like we talk about, where it's like you need X number of RBs, X number of wide receivers, X number of QBs, and you want to stay within that realm. If you're forcing yourself to take guys in the second and third round that don't jive with who you took in the first round, then you're going to mess that whole thing up. So I'm in on Christian McCaffrey, but I've seen exactly what you're talking about this
Yeah.
year, particularly at that turn, man. I love the running backs, and I don't necessarily like the wide receivers as much. So if you, the later you can get McCaffrey, then it feels better. But taking him where you have to at like 3 or 4, it kind of feels gross on the way back.
See, I kind of disagree with that because when Brock Purdy was playing quarterback, once that switch happened, McCaffrey averaged over 23 points a game with him. And yes, Mitchell was out some of those times. It still feels a little overblown to me. For context, Cooper Kupp was the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy points per game, and it was still only 22. So McCaffrey averaged a full point over the number 1 wide receiver. And I really think that for that value, I mean, you can get any kind of receiver in the second or third round. I think McCaffrey's a great pick there.
Well, what happens? My concern right now is what happens if Trey Lance does end up being the quarterback, and now you fall into that mobile quarterback, vulturing touchdowns, not really dumping it down range. I know it's Christian McCaffrey, so they're going to design pass plays to him. But if Brock Purdy gets announced as the guy, I immediately am feeling really good about McCaffrey. But until that happens, I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, for me, it's really a structural thing more than, a player take against McCaffrey. Like
Mhm.
where you have to take him, I'd much rather have the third round running backs and being able to just build off of either wide receiver. And, we've seen like that third round it seems like it's one of the worst places to take a wide receiver because you're looking at Metcalfs, and then you got it's a huge tier break from like the Olaves, Higgins, Waddles, and then you have like Metcalf almost on an island by himself, and then you've got Keenan Allen, Christian Watson, Amari Cooper, guys like that. So it's very hard to do that. And when you take a guy like Christian McCaffrey, you're almost locked into having to take 2 of those wide receivers, or then taking another detour. Maybe you take a Mark Andrews or an elite quarterback or whatever you got to do. So it kind of boxes you in a little bit having to take a Christian McCaffrey just in a vacuum. Christian McCaffrey's great. He's going to be, in that mix of like between RB1 and RB4 for the year. But, when you're looking at, if you're doing just like one draft, then, take your guys, be happy with Christian McCaffrey. But, when you're taking doing a bunch of drafts, McCaffrey, like I said, kind of boxes you into having to take, a couple wide receivers just so you don't miss the boat on them.
And since a lot of us are doing a lot of drafts, I have seen some very sharp players taking McCaffrey and then also getting 2 more backs, just given, like I said, that for some reason, well, not some reason, because wide receivers are pushed up right now by those doing all the drafting, and thus the running backs have fallen down. And so a lot of players will take advantage of just the running backs being depressed, the RB1s anyways, in that range. Having said that, it still just seems like such a disadvantage because when you get back, let's say you take McCaffrey and then you instead go wide receiver, even then we're talking about being in the 3rd or 4th tier of wide receivers already, because when it comes back to you, it's usually T. Higgins, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, that group of players. And that's a significant drop-off even from the A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs tier. So it just seems like it's a lot of draft capital lost already.
It's so crazy that you mentioned that, Daigle, that and how people are really embracing the zero and hero RB is that you can take the RB2, RB3, and RB4 in this format last year and stack them. Like it's realistic to go Christian McCaffrey, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, like bing, bang, boom, and actually build that, which, last year would have been great, but again, the fragility is kind of scaring everybody. But anyway, let's move on to another one. Britt, who do you got on yours? Who's a landmine for you that you're avoiding this year, first or second round?
So a lot of people are probably not going to be very happy with this, but I'm avoiding Jonathan Taylor for 2 reasons. We all know that he's an elite running back, but Shane Steichen is known for rotating his backs. We saw it in Philadelphia last year. We saw it when he was offensive coordinator with the Chargers, where Austin Eckler got 116 carries and Josh freaking Kelly got 111. I mean, now with Zach Moss and Deion Jackson, who actually did fairly well in Jonathan Taylor's absence, I think that he continues that tradition here. The second reason is the addition of Anthony Richardson at quarterback. We've seen that mobile quarterbacks don't tend to target their running backs, and Steichen's going to use Richardson's cannon to pass downfield. He loves to use the run game to open up those downfield passes, and I think that while Taylor's going to have a role, he's not really going to return at a RB4 ADP.
What do you think, Daigle?
So I have Jonathan Taylor in my second tier running backs with Barkley or Ramondre Stevenson, that group of players, but I have him at the very bottom. So just in terms of ranking, I do think he's the one. If he happens to fall out, he does move closer to, Joe Mixon, back in that range as a low-end RB1. On one hand, he did average the same amount of carries in 2021 that he did last year across those 11 injured games. Like, he averaged 17.6 carries in 2021 and 17.5 last year. The difference was, of course, through his first two years in the league, he totaled 29 touchdowns. Last year, obviously, just 4 total touchdowns. I think because he was injured. But to your point, Britt, I am very concerned just about overall running back targets working with both mobile and rookie quarterbacks. It's kind of why Miles Sanders' ADP is depressed as well. Just a concerning target share whenever you're looking at a young player who's developing under center. And so, yes, Taylor's due for regression, but I question the ceiling giving his passing work. And that's kind of where I fall on Taylor right now.
And this is the ceiling format. I mean, we're talking about underdog here. We're talking about winning $3 million. Last year, $2 million, $3 million this year. So you can't be going for guys where you don't think they can be in my first and second round. I'm only taking players that can be the number one at their position. End of story. That's where I'm at. I'm shooting for the moon here. So I don't want to settle for a guy that, if I worry about the offense being good and I worry about him getting receptions, I'm just out. And just wanted to acknowledge the people in the chat: Toronto, Dave, Craig, Mr. Scampers, thanks for popping in. Mike, thank you for popping in as well. I love you, buddy. You really brighten up my day, dude. Thank you. Appreciate you guys for coming by.
Yeah.
I don't know. Kev, are you in on GT? You out?
He falls in a weird ADP pocket where, I've been getting a lot of 8 to 12 picks at the end of the first round. So he kind of goes there. But if you're looking at the running backs, I like Nick Chubb better than him. I like Tony Pollard better than him. And I like Ramondre Stevenson better than him. It falls on the things that you guys already said about, Anthony Richardson, a rookie quarterback, having to kind of just be there. And, they've got some weapons there, but Taylor's going to have to get, volume. And I just don't know about the touchdown equity there, in Indianapolis, having that team kind of growing around Anthony Richardson. And then, who's to say he doesn't just siphon off, a half dozen touchdowns, and that's just going to hurt the bottom line even more. So, Taylor, I think is going to be a low end RB1, but there's a bunch of guys I'd rather have, and I don't want to take him at pick 16 overall when I can get someone, obviously I like better coming around at the 2-3 turn, Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, you could even make a case for Josh Jacobs. That seems like a guy that for some reason seems to fall, and I don't quite get it when you're talking about kind of the market share for a running back. So I'm Jonathan Taylor, I will take if it makes sense. If he falls, if I'm at the if I have a first 4 pick and he just kind of lands there, I'm fine with it as kind of an anchor running back, but I'm not going out of my way to take him either at or ahead of ADP.
Right. And that gets into my thought process here and my guy that I'm avoiding. But before, let me lay it out. As you guys just said, the moment Daigle moves Ramondre Stevenson or you move Nick Chubb ahead of Jonathan Taylor, you're not getting Jonathan Taylor, right? Because he goes someone else is going to take him. And just by the fact that you taking Stevenson there, you're not going to get him. That's why we have to split hairs in the first and second round on who we're taking, because moving a guy one spot back means you're not getting that guy a lot of times. So for me, the guy in this particular format that I'm not taking is Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I've come around on this player a lot. If this were a hometown league that was full PPR, you start 3 wide receivers in a flex, I'd be all over him at this ADP because he's very safe in that format, and he has a high upside in that format with the full PPR. The problem that I run into with this is that we're trying to get guys that are going to have spike weeks, and B, get guys that can have multiple of them in a row. This guy, every once in a while, he will have a spike week, but you look at his stats, the way he gets it done, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's 60-yard, 70-yard games at times with 1 million receptions. When you look at a guy like Jalen Waddle, both these guys had 7-yard ADOTs as rookies, and Jalen Waddle made the transition in Mike McDaniel's offense to a 13-yard ADOT, a full-time outside guy. Amon-Ra St. Brown stayed the guy he was, 6.9 yards, average depth of target. So he goes out last year as 150 targets, but only has like 1,100 yards. Something needs to actually change for him to have the upside of a Tyreek Hill or of a Justin Jefferson, where they're scoring 300 points in this format rather than like 215 or so. So I obviously understand that there is a possibility that he now does change and maybe he does become more of a full-time flanker running higher ADOT routes, but he doesn't really have the speed, doesn't really have the size. If he does do that, you know what? Whoever gets him, great for them. But for me, I think he is who he is, and I'm just not going for him in this format where I need to beat everybody to get that money.
So my only pushback is that I think he can and will score more touchdowns, assuming his volume goes nowhere. Since everyone's tried to put landmines in his way now for 2 consecutive seasons, and it doesn't work. Put anyone else in the field, Amon-Ra St. Brown still earns targets because he's very good. He's basically like Cooper Kupp, where he works specifically from the slot, but they still find concerted ways to get him targets. Even last year when they traded T.J. Hawkinson, he had a carry in 7 consecutive games because they said, okay, how do we get you the ball more now that Hawkins not on the field? But more importantly, everyone says, okay, Jamal Williams scored 10 touchdowns on 16 carries from the 1-yard line. So when the Lions get there, then they're just going to run the ball again. First off, Williams, obviously, that was the most touchdowns from the 1-yard line of any player since 2015. It's not going to happen again. Also, you have to get back to the 1-yard line, and the Lions only got to the 1-yard line because Amon-Ra St. Brown was tackled inside the 5-yard line 7 different times. So he was there trying to score touchdowns. He just happened to get ankle tackled or slip and fall, and so it's coming. It's absolutely coming. He was there in range all the time, and so I do think he scores 5, 6+ touchdowns this year, which will obviously help out his fantasy output.
The thing is, though, when you talk about like the weapons and everything, the first year they let Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones leave for comp picks, right?
Yeah.
Last year they draft a guy that is going to miss most of the season, and then they trade away their tight end. This year is the first time. I mean, they still don't quite have the final offense. It's not like we look at them like the Bengals where we say, well, it's all in place. They're, they have the split end, they have the flanker, they have the slot guy, like they're done. But they did go and add. They added Sam Laporta, they added Jahmyr Gibbs. They will get a healthy Jameson Williams back down the stretch when it's most important for this format. So I do, like, it's one of those things where if I'm in a league, like I said, if I was in a high stakes league where it's the winner of a contained 12-team league gets the money, then I love Amon-Ra St. Brown. But in this one where we're talking about these big tournaments, I just feel like there's guys out there that can have 1,500, 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 yards. Man, maybe it's possible for this player, but I think they need to change the way they use him for him to have 1,400, 1,500 yards, right? And it could happen. It could. It's just the way they're using him now. It's tough.
Do you have Devontae Adams over him? Because I think that's the point of contention right now, is that Adams, ARSB, and Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave at times seem to be like the 4 that everyone's trying to parse through.
So the problem, it's actually, I don't have Devontae Adams ahead, but the problem is I have Jalen Waddle ahead. So
okay.
For me to take, so it's like you with the Mondre, right? So when you look at where JT goes, Jonathan Taylor goes RB4 and Ramondre goes RB9. So you're going to get Ramondre every time. I have Jalen Waddle ahead. So if so facto, I end up taking him every time. I even on this show drafted Amon-Ra St. Brown when conditions were perfect. Right, all the guys I liked better, Waddle, Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, they all went, but it's just, and a bunch of running backs have to go too. It's just by the nature of me moving him down a little bit, I just don't end up with him, and I just worry that there's people out there that are taking him in the first round, and they're not going to have enough upside to push through the gauntlet you need to go through, because in playoffs in this, you need to be finishing in the top percentile of everybody every week. So like you need all your wide receivers need to hit for 100 plus yards and a touchdown, and they need to do that a bunch of weeks in a row.
That's also why best ball is so stupid. And I say that as someone who plays it since March every single year, including heavy in the streets now. Like Britt and I can be down on JT, but when JT slips 12 picks, I take him every time.
I take him too.
I'm just playing the game. So it's just
it is. It's exactly like that.
Jobs.
Yeah, it is crazy. And it's like JT is the same thing where we talk about upside or whatever, but like if I were able to get like if my hometown league with my buddies, that's 12-team league, $250 buy-in. If my first 2 picks were Jonathan Taylor and Amon-Ra St. Brown, I'd be fired up, right? But this is a totally different beast here.
Right. Yeah, I've had my 65 puppy 2 slows right now are
65.
Yeah, right now till puppy 3 comes out, then I'll probably get another 70, 75. Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about parsing through these wide receivers. Mine is Devontae Adams, and I know a lot of people want to just point to the fact that he went from Aaron Rodgers and he went to Derek Carr, didn't really skip a beat. Is Jimmy Garoppolo that much of a difference between another step down from Derek Carr? And I do think he is. You're looking at out of 16 passing touchdowns that Jimmy G had last year, he had just 1 touchdown of 20 plus air yards. Adams had 9 touchdowns of 20 plus air yards last season. Like something has to give with this here. And then you're taking him, you're still taking the AJ Browns, the Stephon Diggs, and then you're taking him almost right after in lockstep with Garrett Wilson. So that's kind of where I have the problem, where we've talked about it. That's been the running theme of you have all these guys that you'd rather take. So you're not taking Devontae Adams. I like Devonta Smith. I like Olave. I like Jalen Waddle. I like all those guys over Devontae Adams. So, and he's not really a guy that slips. So, I'm just not taking him at the 1-2 turn if I have a pick anywhere near there.
Those 9 touchdowns led the league, and he also led the league in yards, 20 yards downfield as well. Whereas if you take not just last year, but the last 2 years, Garoppolo or Derek Carr has both thrown and been more accurate in rate of passes 20 yards downfield. Garoppolo just doesn't go there. That's not what he does at all, nor is he good at it. That's why he doesn't do it. So I question Adams' ceiling more than anything, which again, when we're talking about $3 million top heavy payout here, then yes, that's why I have quite a few wide receivers ranked higher than Adams, who I still think it's the workload under Josh McDaniels. He was the only wide receiver, Adams was last year, to see 30% of his team's targets. But yes, the ceiling without those deep balls is definitely in question.
Yeah, and Devontae Adams doesn't really seem too into Jimmy G, huh? Just some of the comments there. I know he backtracked a little bit.
Neither are any of us, so that's okay.
Yeah, I know, but it's just like, and I just look around at like Tyreek Hill was like, 2 is the man, maybe the most accurate quarterback I'm playing with, and I'm like, okay, maybe he's blowing smoke, but at least it's positive smoke. Like it's real scary when you hear that, and then you combine it with the foot injury stuff, and you combine it with, Josh McDaniel. I mean, look at Derek Carr's completion percentage the past few years, 67, 70%, 4 years in a row. And then under, with John Gruden and the whole crew, then Josh McDaniels comes in and it drops to 60. Like that is scary. That I don't know if that's all Derek Carr's fault, right?
Assuming not, and I hope not, since that's why I'm also drafting Chris Olave, thinking Derek Carr can still support a wide receiver 1. But yeah, from Garoppolo, without Kyle Shanahan scheming, certainly so many question marks about the Raiders offense.
Yeah. Let's get to the next section of the draft here. That was the first and second round ADP landmines in rounds 3 to 5. Kev, who do you think should go first here?
Let's just defer to John. John, who do you got as far as your landmine in rounds 3 through 5? Easy for me to say.
It's not really even big picture takeaway because he's since slipped to the RB dead zone. But I came into the year thinking that Travis Etienne was the one we were going to lose as a player that people would probably view as a middle of the road, low end RB1, but it was actually going to slip out because he's historically been a terrible pass catcher in the NFL, really ever since he tore his ACL at Clemson, honestly. But last year, without James Robinson, Etienne did get the workload. He handled 85% of the team's backfield touches. He totaled the 11th most routes run at his position, but still only saw more than 3 targets and one of his last 12 games without Robinson, as a player who just hasn't and may honestly not be able to earn targets in the NFL. Then now we also see that JaMychal Hasty stepped in and was great as a pass catching back. He's still on the roster. They obviously add Tank Bigsby, who led Auburn, who had a career 15.5% target share in the SEC, first of all 4 years he played at Auburn, but then also led Auburn in rushing in all 4 years in college as well. So he's a significant impact that they spent high draft capital on. So overall, I think Etienne is definitely losing touches in a committee and may just be an early down back, which absolutely is not good for his value, given that he's going as a fringe RB1 right now. So just a player I'm out on overall.
We have to separate our preconceived notions from the realities, right? Like Antonio, people are still telling me Antonio Gibson played wide receiver in college. And
At
I'm
Memphis,
like, I'm like, it's another game at this level. It's if Etienne had every opportunity to be that guy and he couldn't figure out the pass blocking scheme or whatever it ended up being, it's not working right now for him. So he is on the hot seat for sure. If he can't figure it out this year, then he could be a one-dimensional back. And again, when we're talking about upside, Scott Barrett did the math a while ago that proves that in every format, including standard, targets, not receptions, targets are more valuable than carries. So if he's not going to catch balls, I'm out.
Yep, I wrote an article about that exact same thing over at Fantasy Alarm. Go check it out. And while you're over there, check out the draft guide as well.
Good job, Britt.
Basically laid out all the reasons that you laid out, John. I mean, I verbally retweet everything that you guys just said.
Verbally retweet. Elon will monetize that, so please maybe don't use that specific verbiage. But yeah, like him going around like Najee Harris, like I'm not really drafting that pocket of running backs. I'm not really drafting much in the next couple rounds either. I'm not really drafting Najee. I might take a stab on like Gibbs if he falls. He seems the one that's falling because I think he's mispriced in the middle of the 4th. But Etienne's going right there, and he seems to get just snapped up right away with the illusion that, we're talking about a burgeoning offense with Trevor Lawrence. Now they've got Cal Ridley, Kirk, Zay Jones, Evan Engram, all these guys. This offense is obviously ascending, but I don't know if it's going to be ascending through Travis Etienne. Now you had Tank Bigsby with a pretty good price, in the double-digit rounds, where if you're looking for a back with contingent value to start, and then, could certainly work his way into being kind of a thorn in Etienne's side. I mean, that's kind of what you're hoping for if you're drafting Tank Bigsby. Clearly, productive at Auburn as almost the only guy there. So definitely not looking to grab, if I want to jack to a running back, I don't want it in the beginning of the 4th. I want it, in the double-digit rounds, hoping for that kind of upside later on with a profile that I like with Bigsby.
Before we move on to the next one, Daigle, real quick, I want to get your opinion on this. Jordan Loop, friend of the show, says, round 3 landmine, Deebo Samuel, never getting 2021 usage again. How do you feel about that one?
Ooh, no. His carries per game actually increased with Christian McCaffrey last year, because what they did was actually just split McCaffrey out wide quite often and never took him off the field when they had him. So no, I think this is the year that we see a Deebo bounce back. Maybe not to the extent of 2021, since, gosh, what was it? Was it a touchdown for every 5.5 carries? I think it was 5.5 or 7.5.
Stupid like that.
Yeah, it was something that we knew was not sustainable. But at the same time, that if we can get receiver usage, since he did lead the team with a 23% target share from Brock Purdy whenever he was healthy, if we can get that usage and the increased amount of carries as well, we're finally getting both together. No, I think like this is the year he actually bounces back, since we knew last year was going to be a down year.
Love it. All right, well, I'll do mine quick because it kind of lends itself to what you were talking about with Travis Etienne. And mine in this range, the 3 to 5 range, is J.K. Dobbins, because not only has he not displayed the pass catching so far, but he has the mobile quarterback, right? I talked about Scott Barrett with the targets. You look at another set of research that Andrew Erickson did about mobile quarterbacks and how often they target the running backs, mathematically it's there. Anecdotally, we know we've seen the way a guy like Drew Brees operates versus a guy like Justin Fields in terms of taking down and running with it. And just last year, if you look at the 3 teams that threw the fewest passes to the running backs, it was the Eagles, it was the Bears, and it was the Ravens. Ravens only threw 13% of their passes to the running backs. So I worry about that aspect of it. I worry about J.K. Dobbins not showing up to practice already. Like, so last year he, came out and said he was going to be healthy. He said all this stuff, and then he wasn't. This year, he's not showing up for practice because he wants a new contract. And they have Gus Edwards, who is a good running back in himself. They like him. He's, 240 pounds. If it's not Lamar Jackson stealing the touchdowns, maybe it'll be Gus Edwards. So just across the board with J.K. Dobbins, I love the idea and the highlights of the big plays, the 70-yard touchdowns, which we think about for best ball. But when you really take a step back and look at it, it could end up being a lot of empty yards per carry. If you run for 6-7 yards a carry, that's all fine. But if you're not catching passes and scoring touchdowns, it's not doing it for me. So J.K. Dobbins, I'm not taking too much of him.
Over the last month of the season, even when he was getting there because of long runs, he was still the RB36 in touches per game. Also, I know what's coming out of Baltimore's camp right now. I know the hype is around Todd Monken, and I believe in that offense as a bounce back one as well. But we have 4 consecutive seasons now with Lamar Jackson under center. And that offense has finished bottom 6 in running back target rate in each of those 4 seasons. Because, as you said, Coop, of having a mobile quarterback who's a one-for-one talent, that mobility is not going away in any time in Lamar Jackson's career. I just don't see the running back targets happen. And that's how we get a running back in J.K. Dobbins' range closer to the RB1 range. And so I just don't see the ceiling either. I will take him if he dips a little bit, and I want unique stacks with Lamar and Mark Andrews. Otherwise, though, he's not really a player I'm necessarily targeting anywhere.
You know what I think happened with all these mobile QBs, Daigle, is somewhere along the line in high school or college football, they were in that situation and they tried to dump it to the running back and he dropped it. And they just said to themselves, never again. Never again. I'm just that guy's a blocking for me from here on out. I'm sure of it.
Or all the mobile quarterbacks had a conference and just like collusion. Like, no, we're not doing this. No, protect the brand.
Protect the brand. Britt, who you got? Who you fading?
So
Tread
apologies in advance, Kev. But it's Christian Watson. I don't understand why he's going so high. I mean, sure, he had that big 3-touchdown game against Dallas last year, but his overall stats were super meh. He had 3 games out of the whole 14 that he played over 100. But other than those, the highest yardage he scored in any of those games was 49. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And now with Jordan Love coming in, what makes us think that Watson's suddenly going to produce at a wide receiver 2 level? Love's player comp on Player Profiler is Dan Orlovsky. Why do we think he's going to be good? He had a 20-17 touchdown to interception ratio in his last season at Utah State and a yards per attempt of 7.2. And Watson isn't that low ADOT guy. He's a field stretcher. I don't understand why people think he's going to succeed in this offense. And I'm not touching him anywhere near his ADP.
In redraft, I definitely think he's a player I'm going to fade heavily. And I don't even have much of him in best ball. It's just too easy whenever you start Justin Jefferson, one of the first 3 picks, to then already start focusing on week 17 stacks and then take Watson in the 3rd round when it goes that way, or maybe even the 4th round, since his ADP is around 40 to 45, depending on the format you use. But I actually do agree with you, Britt. I think he's a lot more volatile than people are suggesting, because even when you start in week 10, when his season began, when he was over injuries, when he accrued that 23% target share, he played 8 games the rest of the way from week 10 on. And 4 of those games, the 4 he scored a touchdown, he averaged 22.9 fantasy points, wide receiver 1. But in the 4 he didn't, suggesting he's touchdown dependent, he was literally the wide receiver 57 in points per game, just 7.5 points per game when he didn't score a touchdown. So that's good for best ball because I don't have to get the reeks right. When he explodes, I get the points, no big deal. But for redraft, he seems like an impossible person to just throw out there and depend on as a wide receiver 1 where he's going at weekly. And that's my concern. So when it comes to like taking a choice, taking a stance on Christian Watson, I'd actually rather be on Britt's side and just say, yes, I'd rather fade this player.
Right. It is the raw talent and some of the highlights are exciting, but you're right. You're just banking on way too much to go his way. And I'd honestly rather just wait and take Jordan Love. If I think that there's something that's going to happen there, it's not going to happen without the quarterback, and he's just a much cheaper investment. But Kev, why don't you let us know, because you're not only the Packers guy, but also he was North Dakota State, right?
NDSU boots on the ground in Fargo.
That's right.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, you're really hoping for Christian Watson to be able to just earn a sizable target share now that, obviously you're in year 2, Jaden Reed, they brought in a couple tight ends, Romeo Dobbs is out there. You're hoping for pretty much the nut outcome with Jordan Love in this offense, that Jordan Love can feed Christian Watson as the top target in this offense. Clearly he's going to be out there as far as running routes. I mean, through those games from week 10, 5 of them, he had an 89 plus route share in that offense. So clearly he is not just going to be like the deep threat. He's going to be out there on every single snap. Like I said, in redraft, to John's credit, he's a very hard guy to put in my lineup with any sort of certainty. But if you're setting a lineup, I get the discourse against Christian Watson, but for best ball, where if you get a touchdown, you're in the lineup. Like, I'm fine with that. And I understand, that certainly the ADP is a bit prohibitive, but someone on Twitter did say that he is better than Justin Jefferson. So why wouldn't I kind of lean to that? Twitter is always right.
But how many points do you think that this Packers offense is actually going to score? I mean, you yourself has said that LaFleur is going to run it into the next century. So do you think it's going to be very pass heavy? I mean, that is my concern too. Like, sure, if he gets a touchdown, he's in my lineup, but how many touchdowns do you think he's actually going to get?
I mean, as long as they're like 57, 58% pass, I mean, that's pretty much kind of league average at this point. I'm totally fine.
We're all depending on those 2 drives Jordan Love had. I wish they were a little worse, because it'd make life easier. But the fact they were so good and he drove the field with ease, against the Eagles, it makes it a little bit harder to just say, well, I'm out on Jordan Love. He looked good last year.
I just don't like that. Like, with Mahomes and Hurts, everybody was like fired up and they were like, we love what we're seeing. And then everybody around Love is kind of like telling everyone to pump the brakes. And it's going to take a little while. I don't know, man. I wish there was more confidence around the guy.
Right. Well, he's got everything you want as far as size, speed. It's really just the surrounding factors have to kind of help him put it together. But speaking of size and speed, my ADP landmine for rounds 3 through 5, we talked about a little bit, is DK Metcalf. It's hard to pick him in the 3rd round when it's, like as I've said, it's probably the worst round to select a wide receiver in the first 8 rounds when you're talking about the Mark Andrews. You got elite quarterbacks falling into that range. You got your choice of the elite running backs with Ramondre and even, if you're into the Derrick Henry thing, but Breece Hall also. So he, like I've said, he's kind of on an island by himself with that tier of wide receivers, the Olaves, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddles, Devonta Smith, and then he's like the separator between Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Christian Watson, that group of wide receivers. So it's hard to take him when that's such a great group to differentiate if you draft 2 wide receivers, or even if you draft a Travis Kelce and then you come back with a wide receiver. It's hard to take another wide receiver there. You kind of almost want to wait there, but yeah, at 28.6 ADP, you're talking about the first quarter or first half of the 3rd round. He's a tough click,
especially when his teammates are going roughly 40 spots behind him. And it's so hard to just suggest one of them is going to emerge as the high target share earner, especially because, as you said, it's Metcalf who's being treated as that, but Lockett has been the better asset for fantasy football now perpetually. The last 2 years, Lockett has averaged more fantasy points per game than Metcalf. Lockett's also been the better spike week producer. If we're talking about specifically for best ball, he has 5 top 5 finishes to Metcalf's 2 the last 2 seasons as well. And so Lockett has been the better player for fantasy football now in their last 24 games together, a long period of time, honestly. Having said that, I keep still somewhat clicking him whenever I'm setting up Seahawks stacks, because He did have a career high in targets last year, 8.2 per game. He did lead the league in end zone targets with 22, 4 more than any other player, but still came away with a career low in touchdowns, just 6. So I do think there's a little bit of regression coming there as well. Having said that, if you told me to pick one, Lockett's actually my highest roster player in best ball right now, him and Keenan Allen. So I'll just keep going back to Lockett, and Metcalf I'll probably be underweight on the field from.
I'll take Metcalf and I'll take Lockett. I'm taking them both. I think JSN has the Chris Godwin trajectory where he's, where it's Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson, and he's the odd man out just for the early going in terms of snap share. So I'm still taking Metcalf, as you pointed out, right? This guy's had 14 plus end zone targets 4 years in a row. Nobody else is even close to that. And, what do you have, like 22 and caught 5 of them? Come on now.
Yeah.
Him and Gino, eat a couple breakfasts together. They're going to figure that out. Not to mention, you look at his stats in terms of like the targets and the receptions, and it's virtually identical to AJ Brown. The difference was that DK wasn't breaking tackles like AJ Brown, so he wasn't creating that kind of yak. AJ Brown broke 17 tackles. DK broke 7. Well, the year that DK Metcalf was the wide receiver 7, he broke 17 tackles. I've literally seen him do it. I've seen him do what AJ Brown did last year. He's not AJ Brown, but if he can improve in those little things, like if he just gets similar usage and he can improve in creating extra yak and maybe catching a couple extra touchdowns, DK, he could be the monster freakazoid that we picture him being, right? So I'm still sold on the dream that it's possible. And if he's not good this year, then we can kind of say, okay, he is what he is now. But I look at T. Higgins and I'm like, well, we like T. Higgins at pick 22. How can we can't like DK Metcalf at pick 28? Come on now.
I think it just has more to do with the other wide receivers that are going in that range. I think that they have a higher upside and honestly a higher floor. And that to me is what puts me off of Metcalf. His floor weeks last year were really, really, really bad, like single digit 1 point, really bad. And his ceiling wasn't as high, obviously, like John said, because of the lack of touchdowns. But how many touchdowns do we think that Seattle is going to do now that they drafted Charbonnet? It's still going to be probably run heavy in the red zone. And I don't necessarily see Metcalf getting that much work here.
Yeah, Cho says he needs to stop being so soft. For his size and speed, he does play a little soft. He doesn't really play to his size. It is odd. Like Julio Jones is kind of the same way. Like I wanted to see Julio Jones every once in a while. He would just like rip the ball away from somebody, but I don't know why Julio could never put together double-digit touchdowns.
I do think with all of them having top 60 ADPs, though, all 3 wide receivers, that it just kind of tells you Geno Smith is probably the most undervalued quarterback in drafts right now, since he usually goes after Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, around that range. But honestly, from Deshaun Watson to Geno Smith around QB 15, 16, and this includes Russell Wilson, all those guys are the same player. Like whenever I put out draft boards just to show people like, hey, this is an example of ADP, and people start arguing about Tua or Dak Prescott or Geno, they're all the same guy. You just take the one that makes your stack make the most sense. Like don't even try to parse through them all. Just do whatever's best for your construction. So Geno, to me, to always get lumped in at the end there around Daniel Jones, whenever at least the first half of the season, Geno was the QB7 in points per game. And then from week 12 on, only had one top 5 finish. It just all fell apart. He ran out of gas. The offensive line was injured. He was turning the ball over, but it was his first season, like literally ever as an aged veteran under center for an entire year. And so I just expect him to learn more and just be better and hopefully carry that ceiling for an entire year this season instead.
And maybe sneak a couple extra rushing touchdowns for the amount of running he did.
That'd be nice.
He probably should have scored a couple more.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to round 6-9. Britt, I know you got her story coming up right after this. Everyone here, make sure you stay tuned for that. Love that show, but you're gonna have to jet early to get ready for that. So why don't you give us your round 6 through 9 landmine first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and make people a little bit more angry with another pick here. And I'm cheating a little bit. His ADP is 60.5, but I'm just rounding up to 61 so that he fits in this category.
You're cheating the other way. It's easier to find landmines later. So we'll allow that. We'll allow that.
But it's Alexander Madison. Y'all, what is the obsession with Madison? Why is his ADP getting steamed up? Like, I know that he performed well in Dalvin Cook's absence, but that's only a 6-game sample size. there are still so many major questions around his durability and ability to shoulder a full workload. They drafted Ty Chandler last year, and then they drafted Dwayne McBride this year. And so I think that they go to a more committee approach to kind of mitigate any possibility of injury. Madison's also a pretty subpar pass protector. He ranked 69th out of all running backs in 2022. And Lord knows that Kirk Cousins needs all the help he can get to protect his immobile self. Even if they don't go to a committee and Madison is the guy, Minnesota attempted the third fewest rushing attempts per game last year, and their defense is one of the worst in the league again this season. They're going to be playing from behind, and they're not going to have the luxury to run the ball. And I just really don't think that Madison is going to pay off whatsoever.
And 3.7 yards per carry the last 2 seasons, 68th among all running backs. It's been terrible. The only reason I hate talking about Alexander Madison so much is, like James Conner, it's all a moot point. Like, we're just arguing in circles if he gets the touches anyhow, because if he gets the touches, he's going to get there. It's just in this offense, it's going to be in the environment that elevates him, not his own performance, because I agree, Britt, like, he's actually not a player I'd usually target. The difference, though, between him and James Conner is that Conner's going 3 to 4 rounds later, whereas Madison, because Dalvin Cook was released, got jammed up to that 4th, 5th round area where I think that's where the dead zone is based on ADP this year. And so, yes, I am now fading Alexander Madison, but when he was back in the 7th or 9th round, I was taking him thinking this was going to come.
Yeah, I took my Madison a lot earlier in the process, obviously, with Dalvin Cook getting released. The price just becomes just too much of a, kind of an albatross. I don't really want to take Madison at the end of the 5th into the early 6th, just because, he screams he's the quintessential dead zone back. Like, as far as what?
Now's the time to jump on Ty Chandler and Dwayne McBride the last 2 rounds. That's when you take advantage of the ADP.
The funny thing about Dwayne McBride is that, like, he got so much slander because he doesn't catch the ball, right? Like, he had 5 receptions in all of college, but he ran, he had 2 targets in his senior year, but he ran for 1,700 yards. Like, that's,
if he could be like Alfred Morris, then
that's what should scare you.
Success.
I mean, those guys, Alfred Morris, Jeremy Hill, Jordan Howard, like, of course they couldn't really catch, but that is problematic to the other players in those backfields, right? So also, you do worry about it. I kind of like Keenan Nwangwu too. I just want to say that real quick, dude. Great kick returner.
I kind of wonder how much, it's only a 1-year sample under Kevin O'Connell, so it may not matter at all, but I kind of wonder how much running back targets actually matter in that offense, because Dalvin Cook finished with the 3rd most routes among all running backs, but he was still 21st at his position in targets per game, just 3.3. And so, like, if targets aren't going to matter anyways, like, remember, McBride led the nation in carries that went 10+ yards last year. The dude is a walking explosive play, and we haven't seen him since he suffered that hamstring injury training for the combine in March. And he's supposed to be ready for the first week of training camp here at the end of July. So if he comes out and he immediately is more explosive than Ty Chandler, they're going to give him the default RB2 job, and that's the player I want.
And well, that's not how it works with Kirk Cousins, huck it, chuck it football, baby. Right. We're going downfield. All right, Kev, who do you got for this one?
Coop, you might want to put earmuffs on. Well, we kind of do, but you might want to mute me. It's Miles Sanders. So, with him, it's not really a specific player take, but John alluded to, with James Conner, going rounds later than Miles Sanders. I'm just not sure how Carolina comes close to a 7.5 win total this season. That's their line on DraftKings right now. Goes off of the 6th round, just in the middle of, the wide receiver zone where you got Pittman, JSN, Lockett, Deontay Johnson, Mike Evans, Treylon Burks. Like, it's very hard for me to take Miles Sanders when I have those wide receivers and I'm not trying to get boxed out of that group. It's hard for me to pick him when those guys are hanging around compared to a guy like James Conner going 2 rounds later. When you get to the end of the wide receivers, you're in the Rashad Bateman, Zay Flowers, that zone of wide receivers. I just don't want to be able to. So taking a guy like James Conner, who kind of compares when you're talking about a 3-down skill set, on a worse team, but it's really more roster construction as to why I'm not taking Miles Sanders at his ADP and would much rather take a James Conner there. You only have so many picks to make the first 7 or 8 rounds before, lack of wide receivers put you behind the 8 ball. You only have so many picks that you could make to kind of detour before once that wide receiver kind of well dries up, you're against it.
JJ Zacharyson and I were going back and forth with each other playfully all throughout Cleveland at FSGA because I actually do like Miles Sanders' micro situation. I like his micro situation, but I don't draft much of him, understandably, because the ADP doesn't make sense. It comes in the dead zone. And so, like, I just avoid it despite liking the player. There are reasons to avoid him. Like, I understand his target share has dipped for 4 consecutive seasons, although I do look at Jalen Hurts' rushing ability and say Sanders didn't earn targets because of a rushing quarterback. And now both GM, Scott Fitterer, Deuce Staley, even Miles Sanders himself have come out and said they all want him to be a 3-down option this year. But given his expensive price as a player who has historically just lost target share throughout his seasons, it probably is best to avoid him, even though, again, if there is a 3-down option going around that range, I do think Sanders is a better option than, say, Travis Etienne.
You heard it here, folks. JJ Zacharyson agrees with me that you should take Miles Sanders in this range.
No. He disagrees with you. He does
not.
Not.
So you were defending him? And
I was defending Miles Sanders, and we were joking with each other.
JJ is washed. You heard it here, folks. JJ's washed up. Completely
opposite take now.
Yeah. Miles Sanders, man, here's the situation is that I don't care if he's going to be less efficient in this offense. I don't care if he runs for 5 yards a carry. That's not important to me. That, in fact, the emptiness of that is, and the situation with Jalen Hurts is the reason Miles Sanders said, don't draft me in fantasy last year, because they don't do that here, right? You talked about Jamal Williams leading the league in carries inside the 5. Well, Jalen Hurts was second in carries inside the 5. You look at the targets to the running back, the percentage of targets thrown to the running back, the Eagles were dead last in total targets thrown to the running back, bottom 3. Even under Carson Wentz, Miles Sanders getting 60 to 70 targets. Last year, he gets like 20 or whatever it is. He has the upside opportunity here, which is what we care about in this format. I don't care about the floor. If the team sucks, and it doesn't matter. But if the team is at least decent and he's getting more targets and he's getting the goal line carries, which I don't know, Bryce Young, not really a guy that looks like he can move the pile, right? So I imagine any sort of pass interference in the end zone, it's going to be Miles Sanders touchdowns. I just feel like Miles Sanders, finally, we get to see the version of him that we've been hoping for. So I'm chasing that upside. But, you do make some good points as to why in that particular range you just don't draft an RB at all. But this is a guy I believe in his ability, and I think we see a lot more receptions. All right. So anyway, we'll see who's right on that. Britt, I know you got to go. Any last words before you hit the road here?
Just thank you, John, for joining us. It was a pleasure always talking to you. And for those of you guys watching, get over to Fantasy Alarm and go check out that draft guide. There's a ton of really awesome stuff in there. Sign up for the All Pro package. You get 7-day free trial and you get the draft guide. So go check it out.
Who's joining you on her story today?
It is Shannon Blunt.
Oh, I love Shannon, dude. She's
so
awesome. Shannon's great.
Yeah. So I'll see you later.
I'll see you in Canton, Britt. We'll say hi.
Yeah, I'll be there. See you guys.
All right, Britt, have fun. Shannon, dude. Shannon's awesome. For those that don't know, she works at SiriusXM, does a killer job. So that's very cool. Make sure that's right after this. So that's why she has to go. Stay tuned after this to check her out over there. All right, Daigle, who you got? Who are you avoiding in this range?
I think it's easy to avoid just the Bucks players, the Bucks wide receivers overall, the Bucks offense overall. I'm waiting for books to release a couple bets, but one I'm sitting on is Bucks' worst record in the NFL because it's absolutely happening this year.
Ooh.
Let's start. There are 3 big reasons. Let's start from a big picture in volume. The fact that the Bucks the last 2 years have led the league in pass attempts per game, 44, and plays per game, 69, far more than any other offense in both categories. Not going to happen without Tom Brady this year. So we're already going to lose volume from this offense altogether. Also, the fact that when you look at their running backs and how they got targets, like the last 2 years, Brady was wise enough to look at his offensive line and understand this unit is terrible. I need to get the ball out within 2 seconds from snap to throw, which is why he finished with the top 2 quickest time from snap to throw the last 2 years. Not going to happen with Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask, who have no idea how to read an NFL offensive line or understand football. And then third, it's just a big picture takeaway of how they scored their touchdowns. Last year's Bucks offense 84% of their touchdowns came through the air, which was the highest rate since the 2019 Jaguars. And over the last decade, we have 20 other teams who have scored 80% of the touchdowns through the air. And the following year, those 20 offenses, only one of them actually increased their passing rate the following year. Also, they averaged a minus 13.7% lower rate the next season, which would bring the Bucs down to around top 12 rather than first overall. And I think they're going to lose significantly more than that. Go as back as far to 2021, when the Matthew Stafford Super Bowl Rams had 80% of their touchdowns come through the air. And then last year, they were actually at the league bottom at 51%. Like, drastic drop-offs happen. And I genuinely think that's what's going to happen with this offense. Mike Evans as well. He only was a top 12 wide receiver in 2 games last year. And of course, he was the wide receiver 1 in those 2 games, those 2 weeks, because he had multiple touchdowns in both, including that 201-yard breakout against the Panthers in week 17. And so overall, there's just tons of reason to avoid this offense altogether. Mike Evans is absolutely a landmine. I probably won't have any of, to be honest.
I think people, when they think, oh, they led the league in passing, they're thinking like, oh, well, it's probably a couple pass attempts. But you said 40 and 50
for 2 seasons in a row. Yeah.
2 seasons in a row. Yeah. Like, it's crazy. And I'm a Mike Evans apologist. I love Mike Evans. I've been drafting him the last few years. He always gets you 1,000 yards. This year, I think I'm with you. I think I'm going to sit back and just quietly root for him as a fan to set that record, have the other extra 1,000-yard season, which Dustin in the chat pointed out today on Twitter. If he has 1,000 yards this year, he'll tie Jerry Rice, only 2 players to have 10 in a row, 1,000 yards. So I'll root for that, but I'll do that on a personal level. I'm not going to root
I drafted a little bit of him early on, but only because I thought he was getting traded. But it seems they've made that water under the bridge, and he's stuck in Tampa Bay now.
Kev, you've always been kind of out on Mike Evans, so why don't you throw a little something in there and then lead us out here, huh?
Yeah, the whole Baker Mayfield thing with the deep targets kind of just cements that for me this year. I mean, his ADP was way too high last year. Me and Coop had our famous battle about Mike Evans, having to pick him in the 7th round or the 2nd round last year. So this kind of makes it a little bit easier this year to fade Mike Evans for the most part. I am still taking Godwin, just hope upon hopes, just because I believe in the player more than Mike Evans, but it's hard. So yeah,
PPR,
that was our
PPR. It's easier to take Godwin.
Yes, much easier, certainly. John, we're gonna get out of here, but John, thank you so much for hopping on with us today. You can find him at 4for4 doing a lot of great things over there. Coop, anything else before we do hop on out of here?
That's it, man. We got to jump. Watch Britt on her story after this. Daigle, you're the man. Thanks for joining us, buddy.
Of course. Always good to talk.